Hi everyone, and welcome to this roundtable as part of WTIN's Innovate Textile and Apparel Virtual Trade Show. I'm Fiona Harron, the Technical Textiles Editor and Team Leader at WTIN, and I will be moderating this session today on how to augment a team for smart textiles. And this topic continues to be particularly important when developing smart textiles due to the interdisciplinary nature of this industry, something that is considered key for commercial success and widespread adoption, as we'll go on to discuss. But first, let me introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Dr. Raj Bhakta, CEO of the US startup Function, which has developed foundational platform technology that has solved some of the smart textile industry's biggest challenges. Then we have Madison Maxwell, founder of Lumia, also based in the US, who is a developer of soft circuit systems, including the Lumia electronic layer. And finally, we have Sarah Uracini, a design consultant at Design Partners in Ireland. The company partners with some of the world's most innovative brands to create future product experiences. So welcome everyone, and thanks for joining me today. Raj, if I could start with you, and I understand that your team at Function is comprised of scientists, engineers and designers who bring a variety of skill sets to the table. So can you start by offering a brief introduction to your company and then explain what approach you take to selecting the right people for your team?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. So I think I'll start from the top level of how we think about it. So Function, we started as a platform technology. Over the past year and a half, we've sort of pivoted a lot, as many startups experience. But the good thing is we've learned that starting with the why, meaning the use case, drives everything downwards in terms of your integration of, integrating different people of different backgrounds. The biggest thing we look for is talent. This field is brand new as it relates to textile electronics or even smart textiles, right? It's sort of emerging. And I think the next decade is going to be very interesting given that we're all going through this pandemic. So it's going to change up a lot of things from the retail sort of distribution channels we're going to use as well as sort of the types of garments that we would like to wear and the sort of functionalities we would like to have them in there. So having material scientists that know the fundamental manufacturing, the science, the tech, and then having the designers, whether they're fashion or industrial designers, at the same table, as well as, let's say, the business strategy people who can then crunch the numbers. Typically, that's going to have to be the founder, even if they're technical. So some of these things I learned on the go. And so these aren't, difficult concepts. This is not quantum physics, right? So once you understand business, the basics of it, you'll be able to execute. But for us, we look for talent and ambition. Even if you don't know what smart textiles are, I think those things are learnable, so to speak. But talent and ambition, those things are very, so to speak, they're very, innate, so to speak, I would say. So it's hard to come across, but when you see it, you know what it is. So yeah, talent and ambition is the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah, if I could ask you the same question, also while focusing on the criteria you consider for selecting partners to work with from the smart textiles field.
Yeah, so our sector is slightly different in the sense that I'm coming from a product and innovation agency, and when we look at smart textile and smart garments, we look at it in a very holistic way. So we first understand what is the user need and what truly matter in the task that the user is trying to accomplish. Then we look at the context where we try to make the smart garments, and ultimately we look at what are the options out there of technology and smart textiles that we can introduce into smart garments. So for example, embroidery, printing, conductive ink, and so on. So our approach is very user first approach rather than technology. So when it comes to selecting the right team for the development of these smart garments, we need to also look at the selection of the team in a very holistic way. So we need to combine different expertise from very distinct areas as R&D, industrial and interaction design, mechanical and engineering, electronic engineering, and then pattern making and garment technologist as well. What we think is that smart clothing is very uncompromising. So if you get all the design perfect, but then you don't actually have an app or UX and UI that communicate all the data to the final user, then nobody will adopt it at the end of the day. So all these skills and expertise needs to come together in the same at the same table as Raj was saying before, all under the same roof, working together. And we do this in-house. We have about 40 people working at Design Partners, but sometimes if it's a specific skills that we're looking for, then we also partner with manufacturers or specialists in this area just to combine the perfect technology depending on the product that we are working with our clients.
Mm-hmm. Madison, how about you? How did selecting the right team members help in the production of the Lumia electronic layer, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree a lot with what Raj and Sarah said as well. It's so much about, caring about the user and then bringing together a multidisciplinary team to serve that user. Something that I found to be really interesting along the way is that the method you use for your smart textile really decides the team. And oftentimes you don't know that method in the beginning. So when we were developing our technology, we looked at everything. We looked at knit options, printed options, embroidered options. And depending on which way you go, you need different people. So if you're making a conductive ink, you need a material scientist. But if you're doing a laminated method, maybe you need a mechanical engineer to make sure that the lamination is going to stay on your textile. So I think that once you can define which technique you're using to make your smart textiles, then you can find the people you need for your team. But maybe something that's consistent between all of them is that you'll always need an electrical engineer. You'll always need somebody who can do soft goods, well-informed soft goods work, whether that's an industrial designer or an apparel designer. And you're always going to need someone with an eye on the application and the use case and whether it's good or not. Because even if a customer asks for an application, that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll find success with that application. And as a small business, you want to know that when you're going into the project, if it actually has some legs or not. So yeah, I think that those are my main thoughts on the topic.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing as well that the facilities that you all operate in play an important role in successful development. And so could you all describe, perhaps starting with you, Sarah, what your working environments are like and how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted this work over the last few months?
All right, yeah. I think what differentiates our facility to other agency in this sector is that we often goes from 2D design directly into prototyping and testing out. So we have a fairly big workshop and prototyping facility in-house where we have both sewing machines, laser cutter, but also 3D printers and electronic testing bench. So in the same space, we are able to test out our products, our ideas, and just come up with very meaningful solutions by testing, and iterate all in the same workshop. Yeah, to your question about COVID, how COVID impacted our way of working, we first decided to just bring everything home with us, depending of who is looking after the soft good design and who is looking after the mechanical engineer or the electronic engineer. And yeah, a lot of us ended up having sewing machines sitting on our living room or 3D printers in our bedrooms, and that somehow worked really well. We were able to anyway stay connected, and considering that we all work around the area, I think we managed to send across the prototypes and do testings. But now that measures have been lifted a little bit more, we're able to go into the workshop and work there again with all the machinery, because ultimately a lot of machinery are much bigger than a sewing machine, so we need those too.
Yeah, of course. And Raj, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's been, just to echo what Sarah was saying as well, we are sort of a lab-driven environment, so we're very much in a lab setting, and that's kind of what we're accustomed to. So we have all of the equipment that we need, whether that's like typical textile equipment like heat press processing, lamination, all the way to flasks for doing chemistry. And then also wash studies, right? We have our own washer and drying mechanism. So most of those basic equipments for sort of textile product testing are kind of in-house, mainly because we can send it out, but of course, given the pandemic, there's supply chain issues, right, across the value chain. So having at least small amounts of equipment and materials in-house does help. Operations definitely are affected right now, given the different mandates in different states and different regions around the world. We elected to move out of where we were at, and so we're moving actually to Texas just recently. So the kind of in transition of trying to move some of the stuff into a new lab space. But otherwise, it's been okay because it hasn't been where we're all locked down. And then work from home has actually made it easier to talk to people, of course. So that's kind of where we're at.
Have you had a similar experience, Maddie?
Yeah, I would say my experience more so mirrored Sarah's, where we ended up building a studio in one of our teammates' homes. I really appreciate her family being open to storing a bunch of materials in her house and a bunch of tools, because our office is in New York, which was really severely impacted. And none of us have ever been through a pandemic before. I think most people here haven't. So we were like, all right, I guess we're going to be out for a week. We planned to be out for a few days, and that turned into a few months. At some point, we're like, all right, we're going to start getting our shop going from from our respective homes. That's the best we can do. But it definitely has been challenging to have such a physical based business during COVID-19, because all of the work that we do is hands-on, and that's really where a lot of the development process comes from. I think from being in the office with someone else, being like, hey, can you take a look at this? What do you think is going on here? It's really different when you're working at home, and I think that we saw that in our work that working individually at our homes, I think our work wasn't as good as when we can work in our office with all of our tools and work together. So it was a great learning experience to see how these things can be remote and the value that you got from being together when you can be.
Yeah. And now just to learn a little bit more about your companies. And Sarah, as design partners, core businesses, consumer electronics, I'm just interested to learn, when did your company first enter the smart textile space, and what attracted the company to this field?
Well, actually, wearable technology has been around for many years. We were working already on several design products for headsets or muscle stimulations type of devices, or even medical patches. And yeah, we've been working on this for many years. And then when technology just advanced in the way technology got much smaller and more flexible, then we entered this space of smart textiles, so working more and more with stretchable and flexible materials. And now we're working across many different sectors, not only consumer electronics, and that includes also the professional sector, so work environments, or also the medical design and healthcare sector. So I'm working across these different sectors, and the products and the experiences that we make can be very different from one another.
Mm-hmm. And Raj, you previously said to us that the smart textiles industry must do more experimentation when it comes to use case development, and that the knowledge and expertise of some team members can often be perhaps underutilised or not directed to the right area. So can you expand on this, and do you believe that there has been some improvement here?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is something I've been thinking about over the past year. Just progressing through the realities of the market, and observing and talking to different brands, as well as working on what our own sort of product. So I'll kind of go to the beginning of sort of the e-textile space. A lot of the inspiration came from this idea that today we have wrist-worn sensors. Tomorrow we may have these sensors in our clothing, measuring various biometrics to tell you, if you're doing well or not. Pretty useful, especially during times where, we're going through a global pandemic, right? Where you have the Apple Watches, the Aura Rings, the Whoop devices telling you if you're getting sick or not. So those are useful things. I think the question we started asking ourselves, we started out with a smart garment product, mainly for the target market of older adults. And we started understanding that it may not have sort of the 10x sort of market impact, because there's so many layers when you go into different markets. And so it starts from the use case. And I don't believe we have yet to explore all of the use cases that are out there. So for the future of apparel, I would say. So, we started with smart garments. I think that was a great launch pad to thinking about what textiles can be used for that are on body. I think there's going to be way more use cases that I think are more interesting from a sort of sustainability and functionality standpoint. So broadening the definition of what a smart textile is was a very interesting learning experience for us. So we're looking at some pivots right now, actually. So kind of in the middle of it, so I don't have too much to share about that, but that's kind of where we started, and we eventually sort of pivoted out, and now we're trying to license some of the technology we built up along the way to solve some of the problems, like the sensor technologies we have that are washable, reusable, and are just as good as the hydrogel technologies. But yeah, I think the interesting opportunities are going to be in how do you reuse the fabrics you have, let's say the clothing you have, extended wash times. Sustainability, right, is a big buzzword, but I think consumers are demanding it, so brands are going to have to figure that out from a technology standpoint. That's one. Sort of viral protection, just overall umbrella of that. Basically, if we can wear the same clothing we're wearing without the clothing being a viral vector to getting infected. So I think those two things, and then of course the work from home with athleisure, right? Those mega trends are going to create a lot of opportunities. So we're kind of looking at those more as opposed to e-textile specifically.
Okay, sounds interesting. And Maddie, as an ingredient brand, Lumia has several clients that it serves, and I'm guessing all with different requirements and expectations. So how do you manage these expectations to ensure that you offer a tailored approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, unfortunately, a lot of it has been trial and error up to this point. So, with each project, we have a debrief, and we're like, okay, what could we have done better? What sort of parameters can we put around our work based off of what we've discovered working with this client and this project? And what do we feel like were really the wins for both the client and our team from this project? And then with that information, we take it to the next one and we try and improve and make the parameters clearer. So, there are things that we know can be limits. For example, if you're trying to heat, you'll always need a certain size power source. We're not going to be able to heat for you below a certain threshold. So for any project, whether that's automotive or whether that's apparel, we know we can take that limitation to the project in order to make sure that it will succeed. So it's really just building up that list of limitations over time. And I think part of that is also just being really clear about the projects that we're not good for and telling people that up front. If they want something that's really stretchable, our materials aren't very stretchable. And we think that there's benefit that you get great signal integrity, other kinds of great materiality, but if stretchability is the key component for a customer, then we know we can't meet their need. So I think it's also just being really clear with ourselves about, okay, this is what we're good at, this is what we're not, so that when we talk to customers, we're making sure to optimize for what we can actually do well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned trial and error, because as you're all well aware of, developing smart textiles involves a lot of trial and error. So what would you say, just as a broader question to you all, what would you say are the biggest lessons you've learned about this industry that have helped you to overcome design and manufacturing challenges? We can start with Raj, maybe?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I learned was market timing. Sometimes you don't want to go all the way to manufacturing if the market signals do not line up to be, let's say, positive. If all the market experiments you're doing are not positive, then do not go into manufacturing and put up the capital for that, because it'll waste time, money, effort. So I think lean management of your sort of workflow, prototyping heavily, understanding user needs, and then reiterating. And then let's say if you're direct-to-consumer product, understanding your customer through digital, sort of marketing channels. If it's a B2B customer, understanding, their buying cycles, right? What other options are they looking for? Is the smart textile the best thing for them? Because they have a menu of options that they're looking at. So a couple companies we work with on the health side, we're evaluating many form factors of wearable devices, and it was a really big insurance company in the U.S. So they're working with skin patches, they're working with chest straps, they're working with Apple Watch type devices, and then also mobile solutions that are more like you put your finger on, you can get your biometrics that way as well. So there's a plethora of options. So just figuring out like what the market signals are. Sometimes you're like, okay, well, it may not actually be the best fit. So that might not be a good market signal for you. So I think that was the biggest thing. I believe that for what we were doing, the market timing just was not aligned for the use cases we were going after within smart garments specifically. So that was my biggest takeaway from the last year.
Yeah, of course. And Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, well, prototyping is a big topic, and we strongly believe in prototyping and testing, trial and error. This is one of our core beliefs. Normally, in the fashion industry, a tailor would prepare a fit sample to check comfort and fit, right? Whereas in smart garments, we need to check also where the sensors are going to be placed, or haptics and electronics, and how the body will then move with all these circuitry integrated into the garment. So there is, you can imagine, there is double the amount of prototyping and testing to be done. And I think the biggest challenge is grading a smart garments with sensors. So if you imagine 10 sensors that perfectly fit a size 10 foot will never fit a size 5 foot, for example. So having to grade the garments and finding different sizing strategy to grade the garment for smart garments is the biggest challenge that we always face and we look to improve. And the lesson that we learned in the past years is probably using a way of adjusting the garment. So whether it's using zips or buttons or other components that are normally used in the garment industry, to allow for more flexibility within the garment, because at the end of the day we can't do one size fit all like they do in technology, right? Mm-hmm. So this was the biggest lesson.
And Maddie, what's your experience of this?
Yes, especially because part of the question was about manufacturing. I think for production, I agree with Raj, don't go into production until you're sure it's the right thing. But also having a great manufacturing partner has been essential for us. We have a manufacturing partner that we worked on developing our techniques with, so that everything is scalable. And without them, we just wouldn't have a scalable solution. And without their patience, because it does take a long time for a small company to really bring you value, we wouldn't be able to invest in all of the research and development that we did. So I think that partnership has been really invaluable for us when it comes to production. And then when it comes to prototyping and getting on the way to production, I think something we've really seen is that each variable changes everything. It can be, especially in apparel design space, you can change the color of all the buttons, you can change this style of collar, you can change the style of cuff, and the garment will mostly still fit the same. But I think that in the e-textile space, if you change like one thing, like a change in epoxy vendor, the whole thing might stop working. And I think that that's been really good for us to learn, is just how important it is to check every part of the process.
And Maddie, what I'd quite like to ask you as well, I know in the past people have said that smart textile industry often has unrealistic expectations about the capability and reality of these products. Do you still believe that's the case? Do you think there's been a lot of improvement with regards to what they're capable of?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really depends on which customer you're speaking to. We've found that when we speak to apparel brands, the expectation is often fairly unrealistic because it's so removed from the electronic side of things, and we experience electronics in our lives every day, that it seems very simple to just put it in the garment. And I feel like that's the expectation. And when we work with very technical industries like aerospace, I find that their expectation is kind of more conservative than our expectation, because they have so much testing and guidelines and limitations on what things could do. So I think something that really tackles part of that issue of unrealistic expectations is finding the right industries for smart textile solutions. And I think that the industry started by running after every apparel brand. And I think now we're saying, wait a minute, we don't even know why they need this. Let's see who else uses textiles in a functional way that really needs this. So that's been an interesting learning and observation.
Mm-hmm. And kind of just to conclude, really, and we can start with you, Sarah. Can you talk about any projects that you're currently working on and the applications you're targeting, or perhaps about any further industry partnerships that you're seeking?
Yeah, so we are working on a number of different projects in high performance sports at the moment. And one of these that has been completed and is out in the public domain is called Obix, is a protective surf hood that includes an array of sensors all along the head that activate an inflatable collar for surfers that goes out in very demanding environments, very dangerous environments, and they could get hit from a very very heavy wave or a rock, for example. And this was designed exactly for extreme situations when surfers are trying new waves out in the ocean. So we are always trying to work on projects that are in high performance sectors where the needs are high and there are more money, obviously, and we're not looking at fast fashion or apparel. We're always looking for high needs, high performance sectors. And another projects that I could mention is in the home healthcare sector, and it's an ECG undergarment T-shirts that basically is able to monitor and detect cardiac abnormalities, so heart conditions like arrhythmias or palpitations. And this has a fully integrated system of biosensors in the textile, and it can be worn as a normal t-shirts under a jacket or any other t-shirts. So there's no need of adhesives or shaving like it happens in the hospital nowadays with ECG monitoring. And basically the patients gets on with everyday life and can forget about everything else. Just wear the t-shirts, and these t-shirts become the interface between the patients and the doctor at the hospital. So we are working on a number of different projects in these with smart textiles, with sensor-enabled textiles, and we're always looking for these type of clients that are trying to solve very complex problems in high performance sectors.
Excellent. And Raj, what's next for your company?
Yeah, so I spent a year in sort of the digital health space and working with health insurance companies as well as sort of some brands as well. And going back to what I said, market timing, from our side, we believe this isn't the right market timing for what we were developing, which was a smart garment that detects EKG. And so we were trying to go after sort of that EKG market, and kind of realized that it might not be the best market timing for that, given that the market was moving different direction for self-care solutions. And so right now, trying to wrap up the technologies. And so we're looking at talking to a bunch of companies to basically, monetize some of the IP we've developed so far. And then there's some interesting opportunities we're looking at. I would say in the next 10 years, the intersection of apparel is still a huge opportunity for the broader idea of what smart textiles is, especially as it relates to, washing your clothing less. How do you reuse your clothing? I think fast fashion is going to become more vintage fashion in this, like companies like ThreadUp, for example, where you can exchange. But I think there's a huge opportunity of figuring out how to wash your clothing less. So that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, just from a personal level as well. And how do you prevent more clothing from being made? Because I was looking at some stats. I mean, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation had a report basically saying we'll need the equivalent of 500 billion t-shirts in terms of the material throughput for the industry by 2030. And then that just kind of, is alarming to me because I haven't been in the sustainability sector. I've been more in e-textiles, but I think that's a huge looming problem that's kind of staring us in the face. So there needs to be some thought maybe. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, trying to, monetize our IP at this point and then move on to our next phase.
Sounds great. And Maddie, are you also kind of like Raj looking into sustainability in that sense? And what else is next for Lumia?
Yeah, I think we hope to continue working on customer projects and get a few into production. We've also started working on using our technology for developer kits that individuals or academics, designers or engineers can buy to prototype their materials, because right now anything needs to be customized through us for a functionality. So we're really excited about those. And then on the sustainability side, yeah, I think the main thing that we have is that our the way that our layer goes into a product, it's completely modular. So we have our layer, then we have the soft good. So if it's sewn in, it can be removed at the end of its life cycle. But we definitely do hope that we'll be able to dig deeper into sustainability at some point and have a really clear solution for it, especially within the next few years. So it's on the horizon.
Yeah. Well, I wish all of you the best of luck with your future developments. Thanks so much again for speaking today and for joining this panel session. It's been really interesting. So thanks for sharing your insights. And thanks to everyone who has tuned into the roundtable. We hope it's given you some things to think about. And we'll, of course, continue to keep you up to date on all the developments from ITA Virtual Trade Show, and be sure to also visit our main website WTIN for further news and intelligence from the textile and apparel industry. Bye for now.